Good evening, everybody. Tokyo Drew85 here, and I thought I would do a top 10 Castlevania video. I tried to make it not more difficult, but in the top 10 I really thought about what games I come back to play the most. And that was actually really hard because, I like all the games and all the games are really good, but I really thought long and hard about what games I come back to the most as far as playing them even now. Again, this is my top 10 games I still come back to playing this day. I know everybody's going to be different. In the number 10 spot, I put the first Castlevania. Obviously, it set the standard for action games. It's still a great game today. It plays great. I still run through it every now and again to beat it. I remember being younger and I was too intimidated to play it for a while. I remember my brother playing it in front of me and beating it all the time. And finally picking it up and beating it. One of the things that was funny about it was that he didn't believe me when I did beat it, so I had to actually show him that I beat it, and I played through the whole game in front of him because he wouldn't believe me otherwise, and I probably had the best run of that game when I had to show him. So it was kind of a funny thing to even think about now. Number 9 spot, I don't have too many newer Castlevanias in the lineup, but I feel like Dawn of Sorrow is a great game to mention. I feel like it's all the Metroidvania games like for DS and Game Boy Advance, they all kind of come close to capturing Symphony of the Night, but I feel like Dawn of Sorrow, and even mentioning Aria of Sorrow, so I didn't want to pick both games, but more so Dawn of Sorrow, because Dawn of Sorrow kind of does everything what Aria of Sorrow does better. Like, the game's taking the story into the future, and Soma being the reincarnation of Dracula was great, story elements. I thought that the franchise needed to kind of modernize it a little bit, and I feel like Dawn of Sorrow had probably one of the best castle maps in the series. It had great gameplay with the soul system, and everything just worked and played very well. It's still one of my favorite games to play even now. Number 8 spot is Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, and it's funny because if you asked me probably like 10 years ago, I wouldn't even have included it. But I don't hate this game like everybody else does. Being a kid, this Castlevania was always mysterious because my brother's original NES collection, he always had 1 and 3 and not 2. I remember asking him one day, I'm like, why don't you have Castlevania 2? And the only thing he ever said was, it's different. It's different. And then I remember seeing it in the video store on sale for, I think, like $5. And I wound up picking it up. I remember playing it for the first time and being in the town, and I had, no idea what was going on before I realized it was kind of an action RPG game. I did beat it, but I did have a guide at the time, which helped me through it. I don't know how anybody plays that game without a guide. There's a lot of things that are very archaic in that game. But even when I was a kid, that was always the mysterious Castlevania. Because my brother never owned it, and I didn't get to play it until I picked it up myself. Over time, I grew to like it more and more, so that's why it's in the number 8 spot. Number 7, Castlevania, and I might probably get a lot of flack for this, Castlevania Rondo of Blood is number 7. I know it's not in my top 5 or even in my top 3. And it's one of those games, again, it was like the opposite game. If you asked me probably 10 years ago, I would have told you it was the best game in the series. But now, after playing it and beating it, it is a great game. It does a lot of cool things, like having the branching paths and different bosses, depending on which ways you take. But in playing it over and over again, yeah, I'm also a big TurboGrafx fan. And I think compared to other Castlevanias, it's graphically, it's nice, but I think it's just short. And constantly having a whip without getting the power-ups, I don't know, I feel like it's a little less strategic than the other ones. So, I don't know, as more and more time goes on, I still like it, but I don't come back to it as much anymore. I kind of developed, less and less appreciation for it. But then again, like I said, if you asked me 10 years ago, I would probably have said it was the best game ever, but now, not so much. Number 6 spot is Castlevania 4. Castlevania 4 for me, again, it's one of those games I do have a history with. I remember my brother playing it and beating it all the time. I was always just wowed by the graphics being a kid. And then picking it up and playing it, I loved it. It's a great game. It is a linear Castlevania, but it was only Castlevania 1, 2, and 3 at the time. So to me, I think it's an excellent game with the freedom you have with the whip and everything. It could have been more like Castlevania 3, where it kind of had the branching paths, but, it was still a good game in its own right. And the number 5 spot, Castlevania 3. Castlevania 3, I used to hate when I was a kid, because it was brutally difficult. I can never beat it. It's like one of the few games my brother beat before me, and I remember it took a lot for me to beat the game. I remember being on the last level for hours when I was a kid trying to finish the game off. Now I have a lot more appreciation for it. I could beat it pretty comfortably now. It is still a difficult game, but I understand it a lot more now than I did then when I was trying to like blindly plow through it. Most playthroughs I see of the game, everybody plays as Sypha, because I feel like it's the easiest path, and Sypha's probably the best sub-character to have. I always liked getting Alucard because I liked going through the swamp areas, because I felt like when you go into the swamp areas and you went through the basement into the castle, I always thought that was kind of like a darker path, because you go through like catacombs, caverns, cemeteries. I always thought that was a cooler way to go, but it is much harder. The number 4 spot, Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge for Game Boy. I freaking love this game. It's a Game Boy game, and I remember renting it all the time when I was a kid for my Game Boy, and it's just like, even if it's a Game Boy game, it's like an excellent game. It increases the speed from like the first game. The first game was very slow adventure, and the music is great, the graphics are great, it's Game Boy. But the best thing about the game was the atmosphere. Like, each of the 4 castles had a great atmosphere. And awesome music. Like, for Game Boy games, I don't feel like stands out with like a lot of music, but that game had excellent music. It was like one of the first Castlevanias I beat for Game Boy. And start to finish, it was just a really, really good game. One of the few games you actually fight your son in the game that was also a vampire slayer that kind of gets taken over. Again, very, very good game. Number 3 spot. See, I feel like some of my top 4 games are games I come back to all the time. And in this game, Castlevania Adventure Rebirth is I feel like very underrated. It is such a good game. It was part of the Rebirth series for the Wii, along with Konami was doing it, along with Contra Rebirth, Gradius Rebirth, and they did Castlevania Rebirth. It's supposed to be like a remake of the Castlevania Adventure for Game Boy, but like, it's so different, I wouldn't even consider it a remake. I would almost consider it its own game. I mean, like, it borrows elements from it, like having the whip have a projectile when it's fully powered up. But other than that, there's some music that crosses over too. But other than that, the game is its own experience. Like, the levels are long, but within the levels, there's branching paths within the levels that could take you to different mini-bosses. I mean, the end boss is the same, but the levels themselves have like a ton of variation. It's just a really fun game to play. I know people have some criticism with the art style. It kind of looks like a Flash game, and it does. I mean, those Rebirth games all kind of have that look to it, but like, I feel all the pros kind of outweigh the cons with it. Like, I don't hate the graphics. The game plays amazingly well, like any Castlevania game. And again, just the music and the game as a whole is just a great game. I come back to it any single time to play it. So the number 3 spot, actually we're at 2 now, is Castlevania Bloodlines. I remember me and my brother, he had a Super Nintendo, I had a Genesis, and we always used to fight which Castlevania was better. And now it's funny, because even now he'll say Bloodlines is the better game. And honestly, I love Castlevania Bloodlines. It is very almost like arcade feeling, like it's very action-packed. It is kind of a short game at 6 levels, but like they pack a lot in that 6 levels. Like, there's great set pieces like the reflecting water, the leaning tower, the last level where it breaks up and turns you upside down. Like, the whole game is excellent. The music is just is like out of this world. Like, I still listen to that soundtrack to this day. The music in Bloodlines is god tier music. Like, the whole soundtrack just fits the adventure of the game. Like, the first level sounds like the first level, feels like the first level, and the last level feels like the last level. Like, they did such an amazing job with that game, and I still, to this day, come back to it. In the number 1 spot, nobody should be surprised, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I actually remember my brother being in the military, and he mailed me the game from when he was on base. I remember I had a PlayStation at the time, and I really had no idea the game even existed at the time. And I remember being so confused, playing as Richter at first, and you beat Dracula, and that's only like the prologue stage, and you become Alucard, and the game just blows up in front of you, and it's just the music, the graphics, the gameplay, like it can't be touched. And even like the newer Metroidvanias, even for like the DS, like they come close. Portrait of Ruin, as I mentioned before, Dawn of Sorrow, and Border of Ecclesia, like they'll come close. The Symphony of the Night is it's a reason why it's most people's favorite game. It is just a very, very excellent game. And I even remember at the time beating Richter and like thinking the game was over and I was just done with it. And I remember my brother working with somebody, asking him if I got to the Upside Down Castle. And I felt like that girl meme, where you see the meme of the woman and she's like, the what? That's exactly what I felt like. And then when I realized you know, I got the extra items to get, and then I fought, you know, Richter, and it really wasn't Richter. I broke the curse on him to fight Shaft and unlocked the upside down castle. My mind was like blown. That there was a whole other castle upside down with a Dracula fight. I just blew my mind. Like, I beat Richter originally. I thought the game was over. That's it. I didn't think there was anything else. And again, like I said, it's one of the greats for a reason. It's just a top-notch game. The only thing I wish it would have, and I can't fault it because it was made, you know, in '97, that the newer ones have now is a New Game Plus. Like, if there's a version of the game that you can carry your weapons and items over, it would be perfect at that point. Anyway, so that's my top 10 Castlevania games. I did enjoy making this list. I mean, I spent the most time on trying to figure out what games I was going to put in what spots. So I really had to actually think about it and how often I come back to each one of those games and to play them. So this video, it was a fun video to make. I had a good time with it. I hope you guys like it, subscribe, and have a good night.